What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I am going to go over everything I did to K-swap my 1995 Honda Civic. I also have a playlist on the channel with more detailed videos of the process, but I wanted to do a quick summary video for anyone looking for a quicker overview of what it takes to K-swap your car. First step of my K-swap was obviously to get the engine. I chose a K24A engine imported from Japan, and once I got it home, I immediately tore the engine down in order to install a 45-degree cam gear for more timing advance and a RSX Type S oil pump for more reliable oil pressure at high RPM. Both of these mods were not mandatory, but it was definitely something that I knew I would be happy I did in the long run if I just did it now before I even put the engine in the car. Overall, the install of both these parts went pretty smoothly. For the 45-degree cam gear, I followed the factory service manual, and for the Type S oil pump, I just had to do a little bit of modification to the pump to get to the fit, but overall, everything went very smooth. While the engine was stripped down, I went ahead and painted it. I also wanted to use a USDM alternator for more reliability, because if I used the JDM one, I wouldn't be able to easily find a replacement local if I ever had alternator issues. To use the USDM alternator, I did have to use a USDM water pump housing, so I got that off of a 2005 Accord from a local junkyard. After the paint had dried, I started reassembly. I used a K-tune side mount pulley to get rid of the power steering pump and the OEM tensioner. I also picked up a 2005 Accord throttle body from the junkyard to use with the stock K24 intake manifold. So with the engine all reassembled, I could move on to the wiring harness. I am using a wiring harness from a 2002 Acura RSX that I got from a local junkyard for about 50 bucks. And the harness was in okay shape, but since it's an automatic RSX harness, I had to remove a lot of the automatic wires. I could have left them in the harness, but there were so many of them, I just didn't want them in there taking up space. Another thing I had to do, since this was a K20 harness, was I had to repin the crank sensor to work for the K24 crank sensor, since it uses a little bit of a different layout than the K20 sensor. I also had to extend the map sensor since I was using the factory K24 intake manifold, and luckily I had a spare sensor from the harness that came with my K24 with plenty of extra wires to use to extend the RSX harness I was using. I also had to repin and extend the TPS sensor. The TPS sensor had to be repinned due to the Accord throttle body having a different pin layout than a RSX throttle body. So after lots of soldering, and I made sure to use heat shrink on all of my solder joints so everything was resistant to any water or anything like that and nice and sturdy, I went ahead and removed all of the automatic wires from the harness, and it was incredible how much thinner the harness got after removing all these. Next, I just loomed up everything, made it look tidy, and the harness was done. So with the K24 engine pretty much done, I was ready to remove the old D16 engine from my Civic. And even though the bay wasn't in the best condition, I still made sure to pressure wash it off, and it actually made a pretty big difference, so I was happy I took care of that while the engine was out. Next, I removed the original passenger side motor mount in order to install the Hassport motor mount bracket, which is part of their Hassport K-swap motor mount kit for the EG Civic. At this time, I also converted my car to manual steering because I was not planning to hook up power steering to my K-Series engine. There are a lot of solutions out there to do that, but I just figured I didn't want the extra hassle and the extra complexity in my car. And I must say, I'm really happy I went with manual steering. I'm not planning on autocrossing the car or anything, and on the street, I'm more than happy with how it feels. Next, I had to install the hybrid racing conversion harness that I had, and as part of that install, I went ahead and removed a lot of the original engine harness wires, which is not necessary, but it just felt a lot better than just tucking that huge bundle of wires up under the dash. The harness itself was very easy to install. Most of it was plug and play. There was just a few wires that needed to be soldered, and Hybrid Racing had some really good directions on their site on how to do that and how to hook up all the wires. Next, I decided to partially install my center feed fuel system kit from K-Tuned. I just figured it'd be a lot easier to do it while the engine was out of the car because I needed to cut the original hard lines and then attach the lines that K-Tune had provided. So I went ahead and attached the lines after cutting my hard lines and then hooked up the fuel pressure regulator and fuel filter that was part of the K-Tune kit. The last thing I did before installing the K-Series engine was I relocated the battery to the back of the car. I just think this helped clean up the engine bay quite a bit. So now it was time to put the engine in the car. I installed the pilot bushing since this was originally an automatic transmission engine, and then I went ahead and installed my lightweight flywheel. I made sure to get some manual transmission flywheel bolts because they are a little bit longer than the automatic transmission ones. Next, I could go ahead and install the transmission onto the engine. And now it was time to finally put the engine in the car. So the engine went in pretty easily. I just lowered the car down slowly and made sure everything lined up. And now we have it, the engine in. I have the motor mounts lined up. It took a little bit of wiggling around and loosening stuff and retightening. But in the end, everything fit perfectly. And I was really impressed with the quality of the Hasport mounts overall. Next, I had to finish up my charge harness. I already had the wires that ran to the fuse box done, and I just needed to complete the wires that ran to the alternator. And I tried to kind of tuck them away under the frame rail here, and overall I was really happy with how this turned out. I had a little junction block where my battery cable met up and everything teed off to go to their corresponding locations. Some of the wires went up to the fuse box, and some of the wires went to the starter and the alternator. And I tried to follow the factory layout for all of this. Next, I had to tackle the cooling system. So I had a hybrid racing K-swap radiator that just happened to bolt right up. I was really happy with how this fit, and overall the fit and finish was really nice on this piece. Hybrid Racing also had some radiator hoses specific to the swap, and those fit perfectly as well. So that saved a lot of headaches. I also got some heater hoses from my local parts store. These were just generic heater hoses. I just got ones that looked like they would fit, and they turned out to work out fine. Next, I had to install my K-tuned header. Overall, I was really happy with the quality and the finish of this part, and the fit was honestly incredible. I never saw a bad review about this header, and now I realize why. Sometimes it's on back order, but it's definitely worth the wait, I would say. Obviously, grounds, a very important part of all of this. Hybrid Racing sells a nice little kit, but you could easily just make these on your own. I just mounted mine in 3 locations, one of them being here on my shock tower and running to my timing chain cover case. Next, I had to install the intermediate shaft. I went with a 2006 Civic SI intermediate shaft because that will provide the right length for my K-swap axles. My K-swap axles are Hasport level 1 axles, and I was very impressed with the quality, the fit, and the finish of these. They seem like they'll be plenty strong for what I'm doing with the car. I also went ahead and got the factory OEM Honda bolts for the intermediate shaft. They actually have a little bit of a flange and a spacer on them, so I would recommend getting those. It's just 3 of them, and they bolt directly into the K24 engine with no issues. Next, I had to install my shifter. I went with the Accord TSX shifter from K-Tuned. You can use a factory Honda Accord shifter too if you're on a budget. And for mounting, I used the Accord TSX K-Tuned below the tunnel shifter mount because I wanted to retain my factory shift boot and shifter for more of an OEM look. The last step before starting the car was getting my Honda set up. So I hooked up my laptop, hooked up my Honda ECU, and did a few things before I could start the car. Those being hook up my laptop and install the ECU drivers for K-Manager, obviously install the ECU into the car. I had to turn the ignition on before uploading the tune, and then I had to do some minor modification to the tune, including turning off the immobilizer, turning off the VTEC pressure sensor and multiplexer since I do not have those on my JDM engine, and turning off the secondary O2 sensor since I will not be running that. And with the Honda set up, it was finally time to try starting the car. And unfortunately, the car did not start, but it cranked, And after a little bit of inspection, I found out I forgot to set the fuel pressure. My fuel lines were also leaking quite a bit. So after setting the fuel pressure and tightening up the fuel lines, the car finally fired up. Unfortunately, the car was overheating quite a bit and it was idling very poorly. So before taking to the dyno, I did get a new idle air control valve, which drastically improved the idle quality of the car, and it was ready to take to the dyno. So unfortunately, I did not hit the 200 wheel horsepower mark. I came just short, I think at 197 wheel horsepower. My car was overheating very badly on the dyno. I had to spend a lot of time afterwards getting all the air bubbles out of the system and making sure that the car wasn't overheating. Luckily I did. It took a while. I've heard that that's a common thing on K-swapped cars, but overall I was really happy with the car. It was so much faster than it was with the D16 engine, and I cannot wait to continue driving it next spring. Unfortunately, currently, I haven't driven the car in quite a while. The car is being fully restored due to some serious rust and just overall deterioration of the car, being that it's over 20 years old. So, if you're interested in seeing the full restoration process, I've already started uploading some videos, so feel free to check them out and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.